On a frozen Tuesday morning in February, Giselle Harmon signed a contract with a smirk she did not bother to hide. $1,000. That was the number she assigned to a crumbling garage she openly called a pile of junk not worth the cost of clearing. The man standing across from her wore a scuffed work jacket and carried grease under his fingernails that no amount of scrubbing had ever fully removed. He did not argue. He did not flinch. He simply took the key, nodded once, and walked away into the gray winter air. Giselle turned to her assistant and said something that made the whole group laugh. 6 months later, the name Caleb Merritt appeared on the front page of a regional business publication, and Giselle Harmon, the woman who signed that contract, stood outside a building that used to belong to her company, staring at a reality she had manufactured herself and could not undo. Listen closely, because what happened inside that garage changes everything you think you know about how value works, where it hides, and what it costs a person who is too certain too quickly to look past what is in front of them. Caleb Merritt grew up in a house that smelled like motor oil and burnt coffee. His father, Raymond Merritt, opened a one-bay garage on the outskirts of Detroit in 1987 and ran it for 22 years until his back gave out and his hands could no longer hold a wrench steady. Caleb spent every Saturday of his childhood in that garage, not playing, not watching television, but learning how to listen to an engine the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat, learning how to read the stress marks in a frame the way an engineer reads a blueprint, learning how to see past rust and cracked paint and dead batteries to the mechanical soul underneath. By the time he was 17, he could diagnose an engine fault by sound alone. By 19, he was rebuilding transmissions from scratch. By 22, he had earned an engineering degree in automotive systems from a state university, graduating near the top of his class, and landed a position at Vantage Auto Holdings, a mid-size firm known for its technical restoration division, the kind of work that required both academic precision and hands-on instinct. Caleb had both in abundance. He spent 7 years at Vantage. He was not the loudest voice in any room, but he was often the most accurate one. Colleagues trusted his assessments. Managers relied on his reports. He built a reputation as the man you called when something seemed impossible to save. But institutions do not always reward the people they rely on most. 8 months before the story truly begins, Vantage Auto Holdings finalized a corporate merger. The acquiring company had no interest in the technical restoration division. It did not fit the new financial model, did not generate fast enough returns, did not look good on a restructuring slide. 14 people lost their jobs that Friday night, their notifications delivered by email at 11:17 in the evening. Caleb read his on his phone, sitting at the kitchen table of a rented apartment that barely held his tools and a bed. He did not reply. He closed the screen, sat in the dark for a while, and then went to sleep. The next morning he started making a list. He spent 8 months doing what he had to do, patching vehicles at a local impound yard, living on a tight budget, saving whatever he could after rent and groceries. He did not waste energy on bitterness or noise. He looked for opportunity, the way his father had taught him to look at broken engines, methodically, quietly, without the expectation that it would announce itself. He was 31 years old, he had no debt beyond a small credit balance, and he had $18,000 in savings, not enough to open a shop, but enough to start something if the right start appeared. Giselle Harmon had never fixed anything with her hands in her life, and she would have told you that with no apology. She had a different kind of intelligence, financial, territorial, relentless. At 38, she ran Harmon Capital Group, a real estate firm she had inherited from her father at 29 and grown aggressively over the following decade. Revenue had more than doubled. The company had moved from residential flips into commercial development, then into urban industrial redevelopment, buying old manufacturing land cheap, rezoning it, and selling it to developers at a significant premium. It was a business built on recognizing land value before others did, which made the irony of what was about to happen particularly sharp. Giselle had a reputation for being direct to the point of cruelty, for cutting meetings short the moment she decided the agenda no longer served her, and for treating anything she did not immediately understand as something beneath her time. She had been called a visionary by her local chamber of commerce, and a bulldozer by the people who negotiated against her. Both descriptions contained the truth. She was not cruel in the way that people who enjoy cruelty are cruel. She was indifferent, which is a different thing entirely, and in some ways harder to argue with. Indifference does not bend to evidence the way that malice sometimes does. It simply does not register the evidence in the first place. In January of that year, Harmon Capital acquired a 4-acre parcel of old industrial land on the northeastern edge of the city, a former light manufacturing zone that had been sitting dormant for over a decade. The plan was straightforward. Hold the land, push through a rezoning application for mixed commercial use, and flip the whole parcel to a larger development group within 2 years. On paper, the acquisition was clean. In practice, it came with a complication. Sitting at the rear corner of the property was a garage structure, roughly 900 square feet, built sometime in the 1960s, with a rusted corrugated tin roof, 3 collapsed interior shelving systems, a main roll-up door that had not opened in 3 years, and an electrical system that a Harmon technician described in one word, dead. Giselle's team estimated the demolition and clearance cost at somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000. That was money Giselle had no interest in spending on a building she considered a liability. When the idea of selling the structure consider brief internal conversation, she approved it in less time than it takes to pour a cup of coffee. List it. Get rid of it. Move on. Owen Parker heard about the garage from a truck driver who hauled scrap from the area. Owen had worked alongside Caleb Advantage for 3 years, and the two men had remained close after the layoffs. Owen was now freelancing welding, fabrication, occasional engine work, and he called Caleb the evening he heard the rumor, more out of instinct than certainty. He told Caleb what he knew. Old garage, bad condition, Harmon Capital wanted it gone, might sell cheap. Caleb said very little on the phone. The next morning, he drove out to the property and parked on the far side of the street. The temperature was hovering near 20 degrees. Light snow moved sideways in the wind. He sat in the car and looked at the building for approximately 15 minutes without moving. From the outside it was, objectively, not impressive. The roll-up door was visibly warped. 2 of the 4 small windows on the side wall were boarded over. The roof had a visible sag at the eastern corner, but Caleb was not looking at what was visible. He was calculating the dimensions, noting the concrete foundation, observing the way the structure sat on the lot, and most importantly, registering the address. He knew this intersection. He had driven through it dozens of times. He knew what was around it, what was adjacent to it, and he had a quiet but precise suspicion about what was coming to this part of the city within the next 12 to 18 months. He called the number on the sign staked at the gate. He got a Harmon Capital assistant. He asked to arrange a viewing. The appointment was set for the following week. Giselle arrived with 3 people. Her assistant Adrian Cole, a structural engineer from a contracted firm, and a real estate attorney. She wore a caramel-colored wool coat, heeled boots, and carried the particular expression of someone who has already decided the meeting is a formality. Caleb arrived alone. He wore his standard work jacket, carried a small spiral notebook, and showed up 2 minutes early. When Giselle's car pulled in, she stepped out, looked around the property briefly, then looked at Caleb with the kind of assessment that takes about 3 seconds and draws conclusions from the wrong data. She asked him, in a tone that made her assistant smile, whether he was a mechanic or a scrap hauler. Caleb did not answer the question directly. He asked if he could see the inside. Giselle unlocked the side entrance. The roll-up was impossible and gestured for him to go ahead, then followed with her group. She narrated the defects almost immediately, the way a real estate agent narrates features, but in reverse. The roll-up door had been jammed for 3 years. There were 3 visible structural cracks in the ceiling joists. The electrical was fully non-functional. A site assessment had identified possible foundation settling in the northwest quadrant. She said her team valued the property, accounting for demolition costs, at negative $15,000. She said this clearly and without softening, as if making sure Caleb understood that he was not being offered a bargain, he was being offered a problem with a price tag attached to it, to make the problem go away faster. Caleb nodded slowly and walked into the interior. It was dark. He used the flashlight on his phone. He moved methodically from wall to wall, corner to corner, running his hand along the concrete block walls, looking up at the ceiling, crouching down to check the floor surface. He spent 12 minutes inside. Then he came back out into the cold and asked one question: how much? Giselle looked at him for a beat, then turned to Adrian and repeated the question in a voice pitched for the group, as though the question itself was the punchline to something. $1,000, she said, with a full waiver of any harm and liability, and a relocation clause, requiring Caleb to vacate the structure within 18 months should the broader redevelopment project receive formal approval and break ground. Caleb agreed without negotiating. He signed the contract at a folding table that someone had set up near the gate, with the wind cutting across the lot and the attorney watching over his shoulder. When the handshake was done, and Caleb had the key in his jacket pocket, Giselle said to Adrian, just loud enough, that she was noting in the file the sale of a derelict garage to a very optimistic man. There was quiet laughter. The group walked back to their vehicles. Caleb stood at the gate for a moment, then turned back toward the building and walked the length of the exterior one more time before heading to his car. He stopped near the side door for exactly 2 seconds, looked through the gap in the warped frame at something in the far interior corner, something beneath a large blue tarp, something that rose from the floor nearly to the ceiling, and then he walked to his car and drove away. He came back the next morning at 6. He came with a heavy flashlight, a pry bar, a set of hand tools, and his spiral notebook. He did not start with the structure. He started with the tarps. There were 8 of them, in varying sizes, layered and tied with rope and coated with years of dust and the residue of a building that had been sealed and forgotten. He pulled the first one back slowly. The way you open something you are fairly certain is valuable, but cannot afford to be wrong about. Underneath was a car. He pulled the second tarp. Another car. He worked through all 8 in just under 30 minutes, each one a variation of the same revelation. 8 automobiles, arranged in 2 rough rows, every one of them covered and left in a building that Harmon Capital's team had walked into, looked around, and classified as an empty demolition target, without ever once looking past the tarps that covered the most significant contents of the space. He stood in the middle of those 8 cars with his flashlight moving slowly from one to the next and said nothing out loud. The first car he cleared enough dust from to read the badge, a 1967 Ford Mustang